I want to talk to you today about something which some people say is a brilliant aid to navigation, and other people say it's simply a waste of space in your rucksack, and it simply shows that some people can't navigate that well. Yes, I'm talking about ranger beads, these things here. There are many millions of videos and websites showing you how to use these, and just as many showing you how to make them. I made this set about 10 minutes ago from some bits of cord, and yes, as you can see, all they are is a piece of cord with some sliding knots on them. You know, they go up and down, and that's really all they do. You'll see many people with these attached to their rucksacks, you know, as they're walking across the countryside. And you may ask, why are these one of the most controversial bits of navigation kit? But before we look at the arguments either way, for and against them, just in case you've not come across ranger beads before, let's start by looking at what they are and how they're used. It's not how they're used that divides opinion. It's whether civilians actually need them at all. On that point, just an important point today, I'm only talking about the way civilians use ranger beads. If you're in the military or you're ex-military, you'll already know far more about the military applications of these than I ever will do. And the reason I mention this is that in a military context, ranger beads are used for many things which civilians simply will never come across. For example, let's say a group is walking through unfamiliar or dangerous terrain. One of the group may be at the front, keeping pace, counting the paces to see how far, the distance you've traveled. Other members of the group may be doing other military things. I'll leave it at that. You can also, you know, in the military, you can use ranger beads for marking distances, calculating mortar elevations, tracking ammunition supplies, and lots of other things, as I said, that civilians just simply will never do. In fact, I could make a full video about military applications of ranger beads, but today we're only looking at civilian navigation. So let's get back to ranger beads. So what actually are they? This is a set of ranger beads. There are lots and lots of different designs, and you can buy a ready-made set or you can make your own. They're really simple to make. But the basics of them, they're always the same. They're always the same basic design. You have a length of cord, which is separated into two sections with a knot between. In the top section, you have 4 sliding markers, and in the lower section, you have 9 sliding markers that go up and down. It doesn't really matter what type of markers you use. You know, as long as they don't slide around on their own, you know, you have to physically move them. So if you're going to make your own, make sure the knots are quite tight. In a civilian world, ranger beads they're only used as a counting aid. They help you keep track of large numbers so that you don't have to remember every single count in your head. The way they're normally used is that you will count your paces until you've covered a certain distance, normally 100 meters. At that point, you will slide one of the lower markers down. After another 100 meters, you'll slide another bead down until all 9 have been moved downwards. Once you've gone another 100 meters, you'll slide the 9 up and one of the top markers down. So, you know, it sounds more complicated than it actually is. But with this 4/9 arrangement, you can track distances up to 5 clicks. Oh, click, by the way. One click is 1 kilometer. So 5 clicks is 5 kilometers. I think click was first used in the Vietnam War. There's 2 explanations for the word click. It could be that it's just simpler to say over the radio than kilometer, so it's less likely to be misunderstood. But the most common explanation is it was first used by the Australian Special Forces, and when they were navigating in dense jungle, each 100 meters, the person who was counting the paces at the front, they would move their sight forward 1 notch. And when they got to 10 notches, that's 1 kilometer, they would reset the sight, and that made a click. And that's where the word comes from. But wherever it came from, one click is 1 kilometer, so click, or clicks plural, is kilometers. I almost started waffling there, didn't I? Clicks. There'll be no waffling in this video. For once, we'll stay on topic. We'll stay focused. What was I saying? Oh yeah, at the start of this, I said that some people use ranger beads and some people don't. And the question has to be, if they make counting your paces easier, why doesn't everybody use them? You know, it all comes down to something called dead reckoning, which is, it's really the only civilian use of ranger beads. If you've not heard about it, dead reckoning is, it's simply navigating from a known start point on a compass bearing for a certain distance. So if you walk the line, you know, for a certain distance, in theory, you will arrive where you expect to get to. You can also use dead reckoning in reverse. If you know how far you've walked along a bearing from a certain point on the map, you can estimate your new position. So for dead reckoning, we need 3 things. We need a start point, a direction, and the distance. And this is where ranger beads come in. They're used to help keep count of the distance traveled. If you know how many paces you take to cover 100 meters, then you simply count the paces and you use the beads to keep track of every 100 meters. But this is why opinion is so divided. One group will say they're useful because they reduce the chance of losing count, especially when you're tired or when you're distracted or navigating in poor visibility. The other group will say that pace counting is inherently unreliable over any sort of rough ground, anything that's not perfectly flat. Pace counting is, it's not a good idea because it becomes less accurate the further you go. So when you hear somebody say, I'm going to pace count for 5 kilometers, it's never going to happen. They also point out that usually there's a feature, a ground feature, that you can navigate to that's closer to your target than your current position. So you don't say, I'm going to pace count for 2 kilometers. You know, you go to something that's quite close. In navigation, that's called an attack point. So rather than long distance pace counting, you simplify the navigation by breaking it down into shorter legs. Oh, if you've not heard that expression, a leg is it's a section of an overall route. They're called legs, by the way, because hundreds of years ago, when ships started making long, ocean voyages, they could rarely travel in a straight line against the wind. So what they would do is they would zigzag sort of across the wind, and that's how they do it. But when you looked at the track that they were traveling on a map, it would look like legs, either side of each turn. So what they started to do was they would call each straight section on the map a leg. That's, the bits between the turns. They would either do a long leg or a short leg, depending on how much time they'd spent traveling on that specific compass bearing. I'm starting to waffle again, aren't I? We are going to stay focused on ranger beads today. So why do some people think that ranger beads are a good idea? The answer to that is very, very simple. Human beings are very good at losing count. If you're walking across featureless terrain in poor visibility, it's raining, you're tired at the end of a long day, and you're trying to follow a compass bearing, and it's crazy. it's surprisingly easy to lose track of where you are in the count. Whereas ranger beads give you a very simple mechanical backup. Every 100 meters, you slide down a marker, so you don't have to remember very large numbers. In my case, I tend to walk 62 paces for every 100 meters on very easy flat terrain. Oh, if you're not used to this whole concept of pacing, when navigators talk about pacing, we mean it's a double step. So it's the distance between where my left or right foot hits the floor and when the same foot hits the floor again as I'm traveling along. This isn't a modern idea, by the way. I'm sure you've heard the word mile. You know, I'm going to drive 10 miles or whatever. And a mile, I'm trying to remember, is 1,609 meters, very approximately. And the word mile comes from the Latin mille, which just means 1,000. Now, if you add another Latin word in, passus, then you get mille passus, which just means 1,000 paces. If you know, that's what it is. If you've got more than 1,000, you'd have a plural. I'm trying to remember my Latin lessons from school, mille passum. So in ancient Rome, a mile was simply the distance that a Roman soldier covered in 1,000 double steps or 1,000 paces. Oh, a Roman mile is shorter than a modern mile. I think a Roman mile was 1,479 meters. The reason a modern mile is longer is that in medieval England, the standard unit of measurement was a furlong. A furlong was 220 yards, and that was the distance that a team of oxen could pull a plough over a field before they needed to stop and rest. Queen Elizabeth I wanted to stop people building new buildings within 3 miles of the City of London gates. But to do that, she had to define what a mile was. If you're going to say you can't do it within 3 miles, you have to know the distance. So her parliament decided that a mile should be made up of exactly 8 furlongs, which is 609 meters. Well, sorry, 1,609 meters. And because that distance was created by a parliamentary statute, it became known as a statute mile. There was a strict no waffle filter on this video. Come on, we're going to stay focused and not start waffling on about anything that doesn't concern ranger beads. In this section, I promise there'll be no more waffle. I've written a script. You can't see it. I've written it in moss. It's a special script. Some people are always telling me I should write scripts for my videos. Then I'd stay focused on the topic. Next year, I'll write a script next year. What was I saying? Oh yeah, using ranger beads means that I don't have to rely on timing when I'm walking long distances, or, you know, Naismith's rule. I simply count the paces and use the ranger beads to make that easier. As an example, let's say that I want to walk 2.5 kilometers. I'd expect to walk, what's that, 1,550 paces, 65 times 22. When I look at my ranger beads, that would mean that 2 of the top markers are down and 5 of the lower markers are down. That means that I've arrived at my destination. So that's why some people think ranger beads are a good idea. So why do some people think they're not a good idea? I'll explain that by putting a map on your screen. Hopefully it's there now. It's a very famous grid reference. It's called SE 8322. It's just north of a town called Scunthorpe and south of the River Ouse. It's in the east of the country. It's often described as the most featureless grid square in the whole of the UK on a 1 to 50,000 map, because hopefully you can see it on the screen. At first glance, it looks like the perfect place for dead reckoning and ranger beads, because there's nothing there. You know, there's nothing to walk to. But if you don't use a 1 to 50 map, if you use a 1 to 25,000 map, it looks very different. You can see there are lots and lots of ground features that you can navigate to first before you do your short final leg. And that's the key point. And this is why civilians don't need ranger beads, because in virtually all situations, there will be always something closer to your destination than several kilometers away. You know, you can use that as an attack point. You go to something very close to your destination, and then you do all the micro navigation. Some people will say that ranger beads are a good idea for walking in reduced visibility, thick forest, deep snow, etc. But in those environments, pace counting over long distance becomes so unreliable that you really shouldn't be using it. You should be using feature recognition. In some countries, feature recognition is called, what do they call it? Terrain association. Mind you, I have to say, there are some places where you have wide open flat ground, such as deserts or glacial terrain. And in those specific situations, long distance pace counting, you know, that may be the only real way to navigate. So there you have it, ranger beads. Some people will see them as an essential navigation aid. Other people will see them as the solution to a problem that shouldn't exist. And you can't rely on a piece of equipment to solve a navigation problem. You should just learn to navigate better. And once again, I'm only talking about civilian navigation. I'm a civilian and I just go walking in the hills. So personally, I have never used ranger beads other than to show people how they work on courses. You know, I just find there are much simpler ways to navigate than pace counting over hundreds and hundreds of meters, you know. And as I always say, if the simpler something is, the less likely it is to go wrong. But having said that, you know, ranger beads are simply another tool. So if you want to use them, and because you think they help or they do help you, then fine, go ahead, use them. It's a free world and you can do whatever you want. You know, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Oh, I've just and don't forget, the next time that you get into your car and you drive somewhere, the distance that you drive is defined by how far a cow could walk 600 years ago before they had to stop and take a rest. There will be no waffle in the next video. Thanks for watching.